The room held its breath. In that cramped courtroom, where whispers carried heavier weight than evidence, a maid named Lila stood alone, her shoulders tight, her dignity bruised, her eyes fixed on a judge who looked heartbreakingly ready to give up on her. She had no lawyer, no ally, no one willing to speak for her. Behind her sat the wealthy Aldridge family, their faces carved from stone, their silence louder than any accusation. The prosecutor chuckled under his breath, almost certain this would be the easiest conviction of his career. Lila's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the podium, every heartbeat reminding her how quickly a life could be destroyed. And then, from the row behind the billionaire's mother, a cold smirk cut through the tension as she whispered, "She doesn't stand a chance." For a moment, it seemed she was right, until everything changed. Just as the judge inhaled to deliver the verdict, the courtroom doors blasted open so suddenly that even the bailiff jumped. A small boy, no older than 9, stumbled inside with tears streaking down his cheeks and determination burning through them. He pushed past security and ignored the gasps around him, clutching a worn notebook so tightly his knuckles whitened. Every eye in the room shifted toward him, every eye except Lila's, because she couldn't bear to hope again. But hope walked straight toward her. Narrator. Everyone believed she was guilty. Everyone. Except the one person who shouldn't have been here today. The boy pointed at the billionaire family, his voice shaking but fierce enough to silence the entire courtroom. Narrator. This boy was about to expose a truth so explosive it would shake the entire courtroom. Before we continue, before we uncover what that truth really was, here's something important. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why that little boy burst through those courtroom doors with the kind of courage most adults never find, we need to go back to the ordinary mornings and quiet routines that shaped the people now caught in this storm. Clara Reyes had worked for the Hamilton family for nearly 4 years. A devoted maid, widowed far too young, she carried a softness that made children feel safe around her. Ethan Hamilton, just 6 years old, clung to her like a second mother ever since his own had passed away. Clara never tried to replace anyone. She simply listened, comforted, and treated him with the tenderness she once saved for her own late husband. Adam Hamilton, Ethan's father and a powerful CEO, moved through his mansion like a ghost, grieving, distant, always buried in work. The only person who seemed to take notice of these growing bonds was Margaret. Margaret Hamilton, Adam's mother, carried herself with a cold authority everyone respected but very few loved. She believed loyalty could be bought, love could be controlled, and staff should never forget their place. From the moment Clara stepped foot in the Hamilton household, Margaret saw her as a threat, not for anything Clara did, but simply because Ethan smiled more with her than he did with his own grandmother. Those smiles, those small moments of trust, created a resentment Margaret tried to hide behind polite greetings. But Ethan didn't just admire Clara. He trusted her more than anyone else in his world. That trust became a silent alarm in Margaret's mind, the spark that would later ignite something dangerous. And while all of this brewed beneath the surface, another figure entered the story, someone assigned to the family long before the accusations, Detective Russell. Detective Russell had been on call with the Hamiltons since the night Adam's wife passed away. His job was simple: keep an eye out for anything unusual around the estate. But Russell was a man who trusted facts, not feelings, and he never warmed up to Clara despite her kindness. He claimed it was protocol, yet every question he asked her felt more like an interrogation than routine security. And then there was Prosecutor Jennings, a man who had built his entire career on high-profile cases and ruthless ambition. To him, truth mattered only if it could be proven quickly, neatly, and in his favor. Clara, with no wealth, no power, and no legal representation, was the perfect target. None of them realized that the accusations being formed, the suspicions being shaped, all stemmed from something the Hamilton family never intended to reveal. Narrator. There was something the Hamilton family was hiding, but no one imagined just how dark it truly was. The night everything collapsed did not begin with shouting or suspicion. It began with silence, late enough that most of the household had gone to bed. But in the jewelry wing, a glass case stood open, its velvet lining exposed like an open wound. Only one item was missing: the Hamilton sapphire, a stone valued at millions, passed down through generations. When Margaret discovered the empty slot, her voice cut through the hall like broken ice. She didn't hesitate. She pointed fingers before anyone could breathe, her accusations sharp and loud enough to wake Adam from his office downstairs. Adam listened, torn between reason and the pressure of his mother's panic. And in the doorway, small and trembling, Ethan clutched the banister as he overheard the argument. His eyes darted toward Clara's room, fear spreading across his face as he quietly whispered her name. Narrator. But this wasn't just a jewel, it was tied to a family secret that had been buried for decades. By morning, the house felt colder. Margaret had arranged everything carefully, almost too carefully. She insisted Clara check the hallway near the jewelry wing under the excuse of straightening up. And when Clara stepped into that corridor, tired from her early chores and unaware of the trap waiting for her, Margaret appeared with Detective Russell close behind. In an instant, Clara found herself surrounded, questions flying at her without explanation, without warning. She held her hands up, confused, insisting she had nothing to do with any missing jewel. Adam stood at the far end of the hallway, watching, his expression unreadable, caught between doubt and fear. But the most heartbreaking sound came from Ethan, who pushed through the adults with tears streaking down his cheeks, begging his father to believe Clara, pleading that she would never hurt them. His voice shook with a desperation no child should ever carry. Margaret made the final call herself, her voice stern and steady as she contacted the police. By the time officers arrived, neighbors had already gathered outside, whispering, judging, forming conclusions before Clara could even open her mouth. She tried to explain, but every word she spoke was twisted into something suspicious. As the police escorted her to the car, Ethan broke free from his father's arms and ran after her. He pounded on the back window, screaming her name, but Clara couldn't see him through her tears. The car pulled away, leaving him in the middle of the driveway with his small fists shaking and his heart shattered. Hours later, Clara sat in a dim holding room as an officer handed her a court summons. No lawyer, no money, no support from the family she had served faithfully. Narrator. But someone else saw what Margaret did that night, someone she never suspected. Detective Russell was the kind of man who followed procedures without question, but even he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling tightening in his chest. Hours after Clara's arrest, he reviewed the initial report again and again, tracing every detail with growing unease. Why would a supposed thief take only one jewel, especially the most easily identifiable one? Why were there no signs of forced entry anywhere, not even a disturbed latch or smudged surface? And why, out of everyone in the house, had Margaret been so quick to make accusations before any investigation began? Russell had dealt with families under pressure before, but something about her certainty felt rehearsed, almost too perfect. As he walked the quiet hallway that night, the same hall where Clara had been cornered hours earlier, he felt a faint pull of suspicion, not toward Clara, but toward the people who benefited from her downfall. The next morning, Russell went straight to the security office, determined to review camera feeds. But the moment the footage from the jewelry wing loaded, his jaw tightened in disbelief. The screen flickered, glitched, then froze entirely. According to the system logs, every camera near the jewel room had malfunctioned during the exact 30-minute window the sapphire disappeared. Every other camera in the mansion? Perfectly clear. Nothing about that felt natural. Tampering wasn't just possible, it was likely. And if someone had deliberately erased the evidence, then the question shifted from who stole the sapphire to who wanted Clara to take the fall. Russell leaned closer to the screen, noticing faint digital traces, tiny fragments of data that hadn't been fully wiped. Narrator. Someone had erased evidence, but not all of it. He knew he needed to pull those fragments before anyone realized he suspected foul play. But to understand why someone would go this far, why a maid would be dragged into a storm she never created, we have to step back into a memory long before the accusation. The Hamilton sapphire was more than a gemstone. It belonged to Adam's late wife. She had worn it on her wedding day and kept it in a velvet case Ethan often visited when he missed her. After her passing, Adam quietly made it part of Ethan's future inheritance. Margaret despised that decision. She believed family legacy belonged to the Hamilton bloodline under her control, not in the hands of a grieving child who preferred spending his time with a maid she couldn't stand. Every time Ethan ran into Clara's arms, every time he confided in her instead of his grandmother, Margaret's fear grew. Fear of losing her influence. Fear of being replaced. Narrator. And yet, Clara had no idea the true reason she was being framed. Clara sat alone in her tiny apartment, a space that had always felt humble but warm, now suddenly shrinking around her like a cage. She lowered herself onto the edge of her narrow bed, burying her face in her hands as tears finally escaped the strength she'd been forcing all day. Every memory hit her at once. Ethan clinging to her legs when he couldn't sleep, the nights she stayed awake caring for him while his mother grew weaker, the little drawings he'd make of the three of them smiling together. Those moments had been her purpose, her comfort, her quiet joy. But now, all she felt was shame pressing against her chest, tightening with every breath. Her bills lay scattered across the table, reminders of how close she already lived to the edge even before the accusation. And worse, the court date was coming faster than she could think. Clara pulled the crumpled summons from her pocket, reading the words over and over until they blurred. No lawyer, no advocate, no one willing to step forward and say she deserved a chance. She whispered to herself that maybe she could represent her own case. Maybe the court would hear the truth if she spoke it plainly. But even that sounded like a dream too fragile to hold on to. Her voice trembled each time she tried to rehearse what she might say. She felt small, powerless, swallowed by a system she barely understood. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan, his tiny hands pressed against the car window, his cries muffled by glass and distance. He would have defended her. She knew that without question. Ethan's heart was pure, honest, unshaken. But even the strongest truth can be quieted if the wrong people decide to silence it. Narrator. But the person who could save her was being silenced. While Clara sat alone, drowning in fear and uncertainty, Adam Hamilton faced a storm of his own. Late one evening, as he returned from a long day of meetings, he noticed something unusual in his mailbox. A small USB wrapped in plain paper, with a single handwritten message taped to it. Play this alone. Adam stared at it for a long moment, the weight of those words tugging at something deep inside him. When he finally inserted it into his laptop, a grainy, partially blurred security clip began to play. It showed a shadowy figure moving through the hallway near the jewelry wing on the night the sapphire disappeared. The posture, the outline, none of it resembled Clara. Adam leaned closer, his breath catching as the realization settled in. Someone else had been there. Someone who wanted to remain unseen. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind, not about Clara, but about his own mother. That doubt grew even heavier the next morning when Adam noticed Ethan acting strangely. The little boy, usually full of warm chatter and endless questions, sat quietly at the kitchen table, gripping a crayon with a shaky hand. Adam knelt down beside him and gently asked what he was drawing. Ethan hesitated, then slid the paper closer. On it were three figures. One was Clara, crying. Another was Ethan, reaching toward her. And behind them, drawn with dark, heavy lines, was Margaret, holding something small and shining behind her back. Adam felt a chill race down his spine. Before he could ask what it meant, the nanny rushed in, hurriedly taking the drawing from Ethan and insisting it was time for his lesson. Ethan tried to protest, his small voice cracking as he whispered that he needed to talk to his dad. But the nanny ushered him away before he could say another word. The tension inside the Hamilton mansion had never felt heavier. Adam paced the grand hallways, his phone pressed to his ear, calling security again and again as panic clawed at his chest. Ethan had vanished. Just moments ago he had been drawing quietly in the sunroom, and now he was gone. Every second stretched longer than the last, each empty room amplifying the fear gnawing at Adam's mind. Security teams combed through the estate, room by room, calling the boy's name with growing desperation. The minutes felt endless, the familiar halls suddenly alien and threatening. Then, finally, one of the officers found him, huddled in Margaret's private suite, eyes wide, clutching something wrapped tightly in a towel. Adam's heart stopped for a moment, frozen by the sight. Narrator. Inside that towel was the secret everyone was hunting for. Adam rushed forward, but before he could reach his son, the screen cuts abruptly to black. Silence fills the air, leaving every unanswered question hanging like a storm about to break. What had Ethan found? What was hidden in the towel that Margaret had gone to such lengths to protect? Every suspicion, every doubt, every instinct screamed that this was bigger than anyone had imagined. And in that darkness, one truth remained clear. Nothing would ever be the same once that secret was revealed. The mansion, the family, and Clara's fate were all now entwined in something far more dangerous than any accusation or courtroom drama. Narrator. The answers were so close, yet still out of reach, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally be forced into the light. If you've made it this far, you've already witnessed the cracks forming in a family that seemed untouchable. You've seen trust questioned, innocence threatened, and a little boy caught in the middle of secrets he should never have to carry. The story isn't just unfolding in a courtroom or a mansion. It's unfolding in real emotions, in moments of fear, hope, and courage that anyone could relate to. Every glance, every whispered command, every hidden action has been building toward a revelation that will shake everyone involved. And the most important part? You're still here, witnessing it all with clarity, paying attention to the details most would miss. That alone says something about you as a viewer. Your eyes for the truth, your patience for the story, your heart for the people caught in it. Clara refused to let despair define her. After being turned away from the free legal clinic, she returned to her tiny apartment with a determination that surprised even herself. She spread notepads across the table, filled with careful notes, statutes she had memorized from hours of late-night study, and arguments she hoped could sway a judge or at least tell her story clearly. Every word she wrote, every line she planned, carried one desperate hope. I just need one person to believe me. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but her mind refused to stop racing, replaying every moment in the Hamilton mansion, every interaction, every accusation. She reconstructed timelines, anticipated questions, imagined how she would speak with courage even when she felt powerless. Clara was alone, yes, but her resolve was growing, a quiet fire ready to confront a system that wanted her silenced. Meanwhile, Adam faced his own storm. He finally confronted his mother, Margaret, in the privacy of her grand study. Calm and composed, Margaret denied every accusation with practiced ease, claiming that Clara had somehow brainwashed Ethan, turning the boy against his own grandmother. Adam studied her face, listening carefully to the words she said versus the inconsistencies she couldn't hide, the pauses, the too perfect sentences, the stories that didn't align with timelines he remembered. Ethan, hidden just behind the doorway, overheard the exchange, fear etched across his small face as he clutched a drawing he had hidden in his pocket. He had begun to sense that the adults around him weren't always telling the truth, and the realization made him anxious in ways a 6-year-old shouldn't need to feel. Detective Russell, piecing together small, often overlooked details, finally started seeing the pattern. An old receipt tucked into Margaret's ledger, a key hidden behind a family portrait, and a maid schedule that had clearly been edited to frame Clara, all breadcrumbs pointing towards something deliberate. He traced each clue with meticulous care, the pieces forming a picture he couldn't ignore. Clara hadn't stolen the sapphire. Someone had orchestrated everything to make her look guilty. But the detective knew one thing with certainty. Uncovering the truth wouldn't be simple. The trail led directly to Margaret, yes, but the web was more tangled than he could yet see. Narrator. But exposing the truth wouldn't be easy, because Margaret wasn't working alone. The stakes were about to rise, and the next move would decide not just Clara's fate, but the safety of everyone she loved. The courtroom was packed, yet the air felt suffocating. Prosecutor Jennings wasted no time, launching a verbal assault that left Clara reeling. Poor, he spat, as if her humility were a crime. Desperate, he sneered, painting her hope as weakness. Untrustworthy, he declared, dismissing years of loyalty and service as irrelevant. Clara opened her mouth to defend herself, her voice trembling under the weight of the accusations. She stumbled over words she had rehearsed 100 times, her eyes flicking toward Adam, silently begging for recognition, for belief. The judge tapped his gavel, irritation flickering across his face. as if her courage alone were insufficient in the face of wealth and influence. Clara's heart raced, and every second stretched unbearably, threatening to crush the fragile resolve she had built in those lonely nights of preparation. Then Margaret took the stand. She walked forward with the poise of someone who had performed this act countless times before, each step measured, each gesture calculated. Her voice quivered just enough to mimic emotion, and she pretended to cry at the most strategic moments, convincing many in the audience that her grief was genuine. She wove lies so seamlessly into her testimony that the courtroom hung on her every word, unaware of the truth lurking just beneath. The injustice made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats, whispers and frowns spreading like wildfire. Spectators who had hoped for fairness now felt the sting of betrayal. But the moment the tension seemed unbearable, and the courtroom teetered on certainty of Clara's defeat, a sound broke through the proceedings, sharper than any gavel, louder than any whisper. Narrator. And then a sound echoed through the courtroom doors. Suddenly, the courtroom doors flew open, and a small figure dashed inside. Ethan. Guards moved to intercept him, but Adam was already on his feet, sprinting after his son, heart pounding in tandem. Ethan's voice rang out, raw and unfiltered. "Grandma hid the jewel. I saw her." The words shattered the rigid silence, ricocheting off the marble walls and freezing every face in the room. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience, some rising to shouts of disbelief. Clara's eyes widened, hope surging through her chest like a sudden storm, while Margaret's composure faltered, the first cracks appearing in her carefully constructed mask. Adam reached Ethan and gently took the trembling boy into his arms, and Ethan handed him a small box, clutched tightly in his hands. Adam opened it slowly, revealing the Hamilton sapphire, gleaming in its velvet lining, a truth undeniable. Detective Russell stepped forward at that moment, his presence commanding attention. "Your Honor," he said steadily, "new evidence has surfaced." He laid out a clear timeline, showing how the cameras near the jewelry wing had been deliberately tampered with, how the frames were erased at precisely the moment Margaret moved through the hallway. Margaret's eyes widened as the room collectively absorbed the revelation. She tried to speak, to salvage her dignity, but the weight of proof pressed down. Her voice trembled, and under mounting pressure, a confession slipped from her lips. The courtroom gasped, the tension breaking like a storm finally spent, leaving truth standing exposed. The courtroom seemed to exhale as the judge's gavel fell for the final time. Clara Reyes was declared innocent. The words struck her like sunlight after endless nights of shadow, and tears she had been holding back finally spilled freely. Relief washed over her, mingling with disbelief, as the weight of false accusations lifted from her shoulders. The judge, his voice unsteady with an uncharacteristic humility, offered an apology, acknowledging the errors and the pain that had been inflicted. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt seen, not as a suspect, but as a person who had endured so much with courage. Adam stepped forward, his face lined with regret and sorrow, and offered Clara not just words but compensation for the suffering she had endured. But Clara shook her head gently, a small, resolute smile breaking through her tears. She didn't want money. She wanted peace, the simple restoration of dignity that no sum could buy. Ethan, small and vulnerable yet fierce in his loyalty, ran to her side and clung to her as if never wanting to let go. In that embrace, years of tension, fear, and injustice melted away. Narrator. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a place of law. It became a place of heart, of connection, and of quiet triumph. Sometimes, the bravest victories are not about wealth or power, but about the simple act of being believed. In the quiet after the storm, the echoes of fear and doubt slowly faded, leaving behind the gentle hum of truth restored. Clara's life had teetered on the edge of ruin, weighed down by accusations she never deserved, by power wielded unfairly, by a system that often favors the wealthy over the innocent. Yet through it all, one small voice, the voice of a child, of Ethan, pierced the darkness, revealing what had been hidden. It reminded everyone that courage and loyalty can defy fear, that honesty can prevail even when the odds seem insurmountable. Clara's innocence was recognized, but more importantly, Her dignity and her heart were returned. The bond between her and Ethan, forged through years of trust and care, had endured, proving that sometimes the simplest truths carry the deepest power. Narrator. In a world full of lies and power, sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. Clara's life was nearly destroyed, but love, loyalty, and courage restored everything. And now, as the story settles and the courtroom doors close behind them, the question remains, not for the judge, not for the jury, but for you. What do you think? Was justice fully served, or should the punishment have been harsher for those who tried to destroy an innocent life? Reflect on it. Think about the courage it takes to stand alone, to fight when the world is against you, and the power of the truth to pierce even the most carefully constructed lies. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of hope, resilience, or the strength within human hearts, please like this video. It truly helps. And subscribe for more powerful stories every day, because stories like Clara's deserve to be heard, remembered, and never forgotten.